Welcome to Confirmation Week 2. You guys have made it. Good job. So this week's topic is the church, right? I use big hands because it's been around for 2,000 years. There's a ton of history. There's so much theology. There's a lot of important dates and people and schisms or splits between the denominations. And there's a lot of people who are really convinced that the people before them were doing church wrong and they have a way to do church better, right? So instead of me spending the next 30 minutes telling y'all the whole history of 2,000 years of the church, I couldn't do it in 30 minutes anyway. I am going to, in a little bit, have you pause this video, and I'm going to link in the description to another video that focuses on just one small section of church history, the Protestant Reformation. So that is one of the many splits within the church, and that is a split if you imagine Christianity as a big family tree with a bunch of different branches and twigs and leaves and stuff. The Protestant Reformation is a really big branch. And from that branch, eventually, we get Presbyterian Church and we get PCUSA, and then eventually, on a little leaf, we have First Pres of Cranbury. And so the Protestant Reformation is really important to our identity and our history as Presbyterians. And so I want you to, while watching this video, look for two things. You don't need to take a ton of notes. There's not going to be a quiz. There's not going to be a test. It's just a broad overview. But I want you to look for two things. One is the priesthood of all believers. In Pastor Hannah's video later on, she's going to talk about it a little bit. But I want you in this video, which tells a lot about the history and the culture, I want you to be looking for why that term came to be. What were the forces at play that made the priesthood of all believers come into play? Who was it that coined the term? Why did they have to coin the term, right? So just be thinking, be aware, be looking out for the priesthood of all believers. The second thing I want you to look for is a little bit more vague. I want you to be looking throughout the video for common themes of the Protestant Reformation. If you had to describe it in a couple words, what is it? What are people doing? What are some action verbs that kind of describe the Protestant Reformation? All right, so now if you can pause this video and click on the link in the description on the Protestant Reformation. So hopefully you have now watched the crash course video on Luther and the Protestant Reformation. If you haven't, pause this video and go and watch that video and then come back. Okay, so now everyone has watched it. Great. That was a lot of information on just a little bit amount of time. I hope it was helpful. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming. And I hope you got some of the context and the history behind and a greater understanding of the term priesthood of all believers. It's really important to Protestant identity, and it's also really important to Presbyterian identity. As far as my second question, I'm sure you have a lot of ideas for the key concepts of the Protestant Reformation. I really liked the way that it was described at the end, that Protestant Reformation is all about protesting and reforming. Because I think it's one thing to say, hey, that thing over there, it's not right, or this church isn't doing church the way that they should. But it's something else entirely to take the time and the energy to reform it, to make it better. And that's what a lot of the Protestant Reformation did. And so I hope that's a helpful way of looking at the Protestant Reformation. And now, without further ado, we have Pastor Hannah talking about the Presbyterian Church of the United States of America.
I get to talk to you about being Presbyterian today, and about what it is that makes our church unique. So the official name of our denomination, or our particular family of Christians, is called the PCUSA, the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America. And or Presbyterians. So I want you to look at this image, this tree of Christians, or a tree of Christianity, and I want you to take a second to find Presbyterian on this tree. Where do you see us in the larger tree of the Christian faith. Right, so if you look at the tip top of the tree just to the right, you'll see Presbyterians. And if you were to zoom in on that branch, if you could zoom in on that branch, you would see lots of little twigs, right, off the Presbyterian branch, one of which would be the Peace USA, the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America. But there are other Presbyterian churches in our country. There's the Presbyterian Church of America, and there's other smaller Presbyterian denominations within this country. And then you'd also see twigs for the Presbyterian Church of Canada, and we'd probably all come from the twig of the Presbyterian Church of Scotland, because that's where all Presbyterians began. But there we are at the tip top, just to the right, our Presbyterian family. And if you look down, you'll see the history of where we come from, starting down at the roots, right? We come from the Jewish faith. Our Old Testament in the Bible is the Hebrew scriptures. That's the scriptures of the Jewish faith. And Jesus, our Savior, he himself was Jewish, right? So there is no Christianity without Judaism. And then from there up the trunk, you'll see the very familiar Catholic Church, right? And then the Protestant Reformation broke off of the Catholic Church. And so everyone that broke off the Catholic Church is Protestant. Lutherans are Protestant. Baptists are Protestant. Anglicans are not Protestant. That's Episcopalians. They kind of live between the Protestants and the Catholics. But so there you have everything that's Protestant. And from the Protestant part, you see the Reformed part. And that's everyone from Calvin and the Church Reformation. And then from there, you see a number of denominations, our Presbyterian one included. So we are Christians, and we are Protestants, and we are Reformed, and we are Presbyterian. We are Protestant, Reformed, Protestant, Christian, Presbyterians, or whatever order you want to put those four words in. Christian, Protestant, Reformed, Presbyterian. And very particularly, we are part of the PCUSA. And being Presbyterian, for any of those Presbyterian denominations, is about what you believe, and then because of those beliefs, how you organize yourselves. And the big words for those are your theology, what you believe about God, but also about everything in relation to God, all of the world, yourself and creation. So your theology, and then your polity is the other big word, which is just a big word for, it's not a big word, it's just a unique word. It's the word for church governance or church organization, or how the church organizes itself, really. So being Presbyterian is about theology and about polity, what we believe and how we organize ourselves based on those beliefs. And there are two big beliefs that I want to put before you tonight that have a particular weight on then how we organize ourselves. And the first is the belief of the priesthood of all believers. All Protestants claim that in some way or another, and that means that everyone has equal access to God. We aren't a hierarchical church with a priest or a pope on top and tiers of people below them. Rather, we believe that every believer, every child of God has access to God, and that God can reveal God's self to you just as much as God can reveal God's self to me or to Alyssa or to your parents or to your grandparents. Our access to God is all equal. I am not above you in our church structure, and actually once you become a member, you have a vote in the matters of our church life, and I do not. It is, so that means it's representational, right? Much like the way that our U.S. government is representational. We hear about how important it is to vote right now. That means to exercise your voice and to represent yourself in the government. And in the same way, in the church, you have a voice and a vote. You can represent yourself and what it is you believe and what you want to see the church doing in our polity, in our governance, in our way of being. So our polity does mirror or kind of parallel in some ways the United States government. I already talked to you about how it's representational. So that's because some of the founding fathers were, in fact, Presbyterian. And I think that's pretty cool. I don't know if you do. The only clergy person, the only minister to sign the Declaration of Independence was Presbyterian. You'll probably recognize his name because he would go on to be one of the presidents of Princeton College, John Witherspoon. He was a Presbyterian minister. You know Witherspoon Street, right, in Princeton. And so these Presbyterian men brought their ideas of church government into the room with them when they dreamed up with others how it is they would shape our democracy in this new United States of America. And so one way you see that is that just like there are geographical bodies in the United States, just like there are towns and counties and states, and then the federal national government, so too there are geographical bodies in the Presbyterian Church. So in the PCUSA, you have the local church, right? Like the Presbyterian Church of Cranbury. But you also have a regional body, which is called a presbytery. A presbytery is made up of a lot of Presbyterian churches. Our presbytery here is Monmouth Presbytery, right? Taken off the county name, but not necessarily all of those churches are in Monmouth County. 44 churches make up Monmouth Presbytery, and then a bunch of different presbyteries make up a larger body called a synod. We're part of the Synod of the Northeast, so that's churches and presbyteries from New Jersey up through Maine, right? That whole northeast corner of the United States. And then there's a number of synods within the United States, and they make up the national body of the Presbyterian Church USA, which we call the General Assembly. So the priesthood of all believers, that means that it's representational. There are two types of leaders in a Presbyterian church. Elders who are elected members of the church. Some of your parents are elders now or in the past. Some of your grandparents are elders now or in the past. And then there's pastors, clergy people. We call them ministers of the word and sacrament. And so the priesthood of all believers, representational government, many different levels. Everybody has a voice. Everybody has a vote. You elect who from the church, you elect who you want to be your leaders, who make up those elders, right? And those elections get made up through so that at every level, everything is representational. Priesthood of all believers. Second belief, and that's just that we are sinful, fallible human beings. And that may feel really heavy, but I invite you to think of it as actually freeing. We are going to get it wrong. It's why we pray the prayer of confession every single week in worship, because one of the things that makes us all the same is that we're all going to mess it up. We're all going to make mistakes because we're human, and to be human is to be fallible, to get things wrong, to not be perfect. And so if we believe that we are sinful people, that we're never going to reach the standards to which God holds us, that we're always going to be reliant on God's grace, which is abundant and big enough to cover our mistakes, then we better put checks and balances on each other. We better make sure that if we know we're going to get it wrong, we have systems in place to correct people when there are mistakes. And so you've heard checks and balances, right? We talk about that a lot in our United States democracy. And just like there are checks and balances in the United States democracy, so too there are checks and balances in the Presbyterian Church polity. And just like there are 3 branches of government in the United States, even before that, there were 3 branches of government in the Presbyterian Church. There is the judicial branch. There's a whole system of church courts. If a church has a complaint to make against their pastor, or if 2 elders have a complaint to make against each other based on some kind of church matter, they bring it to the church courts. And there's a whole way of judicating, of ruling, of judging in a way that tries to be forgiving and corrective and restorative and just, but it's its own whole church judicial system. And the judges, the people who serve on those judicial bodies, are clergy people and elders, just like in every other part of our church government. So there's the judicial branch, and then there's the legislative branch, which is at every level. The legislative branch in our local church is the session, right? Those are the people who make the decisions, and on up, every level has a legislative function, and that's just how everything gets done, from making statements on anti-racism to passing boundary training to make sure pastors are continually learning the best practices of how to have healthy boundaries, to how we can make sure that churches who don't have enough money during COVID find financial relief, to making sure that we have a way to respond to natural disasters. All of the work of the church, to making sure that the sacraments are properly celebrated, all of that work of the church happens in the legislative branch. And again, it's got pastors and elders, ministers of the word and sacrament, and elders, elected lay people, people just like you once you become a member of the church. And then there's the executive branch, right? So in the U.S. Government, that's the president and his whole branch of power, or her whole branch of power. And in the church world, in the Presbyterian world, that's what we call the moderator. So in our local church, I am the moderator of our session. And that's why I don't have a vote, because I can't be in both the executive branch and the legislative branch. I don't have a vote because I have to be impartial. I have to make room for all of the multitude of opinions, and let the people come to their own conclusions and make their own decisions about how we're going to be and operate as a church. And there's a moderator at every level. There's a moderator of local churches, which is the pastor. And then there's a moderator of presbyteries, and a moderator of synods, and a moderator of the General Assembly. And those are elected terms, typically. So the moderator of our full denomination of the national level has a 2-year term. And then someone else will be elected to be the moderator of the denomination. So again, checks and balances. There's no one person who is in charge until they die. It's all representational. We all have checks and balances over one another. And I think that's really exciting. So that brings me to your homework for this week, which is, I am proud to be a Presbyterian, and I hope that if you choose to be confirmed in the Presbyterian Church USA, and particularly the First Presbyterian Church of Cranbury, I hope there's at least one thing about that makes you proud. So your homework is to go to our denomination's website, pcusa.org, and find something there that makes you proud. I am cool hanging out with the Presbyterians. I'm cool being in confirmation with the Presbyterians. I'm on board being confirmed with the Presbyterians, or I think it's at least worth exploring because of this thing. This thing makes me proud to be associated with that church. And that is not the most user-friendly website, but keep digging. Look through the news, look through the stated beliefs, look through something. Just keep digging until you find something that excites you, some work of the church that gives you hope, or energizes you, or just sparks your imagination, or makes you say, wow, I didn't know that the church did that. That's cool. Okay, so find that, and then we'll share with one another on Sunday. And you can ask me any questions you have about all of the information I just gave you and the parts that Alyssa's covering. And be well, and I will see you all Sunday night.